The wagon wheel hit another rut in the dusty road, and Eleanor Sutton gripped the wooden seat harder, her jars of preserves clinking dangerously in their straw-packed crates behind her. She had traveled nearly 200 miles from Santa Fe to reach the remote cattle town of Alpine, Texas, in this scorching summer of 1883. And now that the settlement finally appeared on the horizon, her heart hammered with equal parts hope and dread. Her husband had been dead for 8 months, consumption taking him slowly through the winter, and the small savings they'd accumulated had vanished paying for medicine that did nothing but delay the inevitable. What remained was her skill with preserving fruits, her determination to survive, and a borrowed wagon she'd promised to return within the month. Alpine sat in a valley surrounded by the Davis Mountains, a rough collection of wooden buildings that served the ranchers scattered across the vast stretches of West Texas. Eleanor guided her tired mare down the main street, past the saloon where rough laughter spilled out into the afternoon heat, past the general store with its painted sign faded by the relentless sun, past the church that looked newer than most of the other structures. Men stopped their conversations to watch her pass, their eyes curious but not unkind. Women were scarce in Alpine, and a woman alone was an even rarer sight. She pulled up in front of the general store, setting the brake and climbing down on shaking legs. The journey had taken 5 days, sleeping under the wagon at night with her late husband's pistol clutched in her hands, starting each morning before dawn to travel in the cooler hours. Eleanor was 24 years old, though she felt ancient some days, and she knew her brown dress was covered in dust, her dark blonde hair escaping from its bun in wild tendrils. She must look like something the wind dragged in, but there was nothing to be done about it now. The storekeeper, a portly man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from his ledger as the bell above the door chimed. "Help you, Mrs." Eleanor corrected gently. "Eleanor Sutton, I've come to sell preserves if you're interested in stocking them. I have peach, apricot, strawberry, and apple, all made fresh before I left Santa Fe, sealed properly to last." The storekeeper walked around his counter, eyeing her with interest. "Thomas Green, let's see what you've got then." Eleanor spent the next 20 minutes bringing in her crates, her arms aching from the effort. She had 48 jars in total, each one representing hours of work, each one holding the hope that she could make enough money to start over somewhere. Mr. Green examined them carefully, holding jars up to the light streaming through the window, checking the seals, even opening one of the peach preserves to taste. "These are fine," he admitted. "Real fine. I can sell these, no question, but I can't buy them all outright. I'll take 12 on consignment, pay you for those that sell." Eleanor's heart sank. She'd been counting on immediate payment enough to rent a room and buy supplies. "I understand your position, Mr. Green, but I need to sell them all. I'll give you a fair price, better than you'd get anywhere else." They negotiated back and forth, but Mr. Green wouldn't budge beyond taking 15 jars. Eleanor felt desperation creeping up her spine when the door opened behind her, bringing with it the smell of leather and horse and open range. "Thomas, you got those nails I ordered?" The voice was deep, rough around the edges like gravel underfoot, and when Eleanor turned, she found herself looking up at one of the tallest men she'd ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered in a way that spoke of hard physical labor, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of a winter sky. His dark brown hair needed cutting, curling slightly at his collar, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. He wore typical cowboy attire, chaps over worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. But what struck Eleanor most was the loneliness in those gray eyes, a deep well of isolation that she recognized because she'd seen it in her own mirror. "Got them right here, Ryder," Mr. Green said, seeming relieved by the interruption. "This here is Mrs. Sutton. She's trying to sell preserves." The cowboy, Ryder, glanced at Eleanor briefly, then away, as if even that small moment of eye contact cost him something. "Madam." "Mr. Ryder," Eleanor said, though she didn't know if that was his first or last name. "Just Ryder," he corrected, still not quite meeting her eyes. "Ryder Yates. I got a ranch about 10 miles north of here." "Mr. Yates, then," Eleanor said. She was about to turn back to her negotiation with Mr. Green when desperation made her bold. "You wouldn't be interested in preserves, would you? I have excellent peach and apricot." Ryder Yates finally looked at her properly, and Eleanor felt the full weight of that gaze. He was younger than she'd first thought, probably not more than 28 or 30, but he carried himself like a much older man, weighed down by something invisible. "Don't have much use for preserves," he said slowly. "Live alone. Mostly eat beans and salt pork." "All the more reason then," Eleanor heard herself say. "A man can't live on beans and salt pork alone. Preserves last for months, over a year if kept properly. You could have fruit through the winter when nothing fresh grows." Something flickered in his expression, amusement maybe, or surprise that she was pushing the matter. "How much you asking?" Eleanor named a price that was fair, perhaps even slightly low, and watched Ryder consider it. Mr. Green had moved away to fetch the nails, giving them space. "Tell you what," Ryder said after a long moment. "I'll take them all, every jar you've got." Eleanor blinked. "All of them? You said you had 48 jars. I'll take 48 jars." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather pouch that clinked with coins. "This enough?" She did the mathematics quickly in her head, her heart racing. "That would be more than sufficient, Mr. Yates, but surely you don't need 48 jars of preserves. That's a tremendous amount for one person." "Got cowboys working for me," he said with a shrug. "They'll eat them." "Better than the slop we usually have." It wasn't quite true, and Eleanor could sense it, but she wasn't in a position to question good fortune. Still, something made her hesitate. "I have 4 varieties. You might not like all of them. Perhaps you should taste them first, decide which kinds you want more of." Ryder Yates counted out coins onto Mr. Green's counter, his movements precise and deliberate. "Don't need to taste them. If they're half as good as you clearly think they are, they'll be fine." Mr. Green had returned with the nails, watching this transaction with unconcealed interest. "Ryder, that's about 3 months' worth of preserves for your whole crew." "Then I guess we'll be eating well for 3 months," Ryder said. His tone didn't invite further comment. He looked at Eleanor. "You got them in your wagon." "Yes, but I can help carry them to yours." "No need." "Where are you heading after this, Mrs. Sutton?" The question caught her unprepared. "I hadn't decided yet. I suppose I'll find a boarding house, see if there's work available in town." Ryder was quiet for a moment, studying her in that intense way again. "Not much work in Alpine for women. Mrs. Patterson takes in laundry sometimes. The restaurant might need help, but Jack Morrison's pretty particular about who he hires." Eleanor lifted her chin, refusing to show how much that information worried her. "I'll find something." He nodded slowly, then picked up his bag of nails. "I'll get those jars loaded. Your wagon behind the store, in front." She followed him outside, intensely aware of his presence. The way he moved with an economy of motion that spoke of someone comfortable in his own skin, despite that loneliness she'd sensed. He loaded the crates into his own wagon, a larger and much sturdier vehicle than her borrowed one, handling the jars with surprising care for such a large man. "Mr. Yates," Eleanor said as he secured the last crate. "May I ask you something?" He paused, looking at her warily. "I suppose." Why did you buy all my preserves? And please don't tell me it's for your cowboys. A man doesn't spend that kind of money on a whim." For the first time, something like a smile ghosted across his face, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "Maybe I like preserves more than I let on. Or maybe you saw a woman in a desperate situation and decided to help her." The almost smile vanished. "Don't make me out to be something I'm not, Mrs. Sutton. I bought preserves. You sold them. That's the extent of it." But Eleanor had seen kindness before, recognized it even when wrapped in gruff words and defensive posture. "Well, regardless of your reasons, I'm grateful, truly." Ryder touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, then climbed into his wagon. He gathered the reins, then hesitated. "The boarding house is run by Mrs. Fletcher. 2 streets over, white building with green shutters. Tell her Ryder sent you, she might give you a better rate." Before Eleanor could respond, he'd clicked to his horses and was rolling down the street, leaving her standing in the dust with a pocket full of coins and a strange warmth in her chest. Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house was indeed white with green shutters, though both colors had faded considerably. The proprietor herself was a woman of about 50 with sharp eyes and an efficient manner. When Eleanor mentioned Ryder Yates had sent her, those sharp eyes softened slightly. "Ryder's a good man," Mrs. Fletcher said, showing Eleanor to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. "Doesn't come to town much, keeps to himself out on that ranch. Lost his parents and his brother in a Comanche raid when he was 17, inherited the ranch and has been running it alone ever since. Well, alone except for the cowboys he hires, but they come and go. None of them stay long." "Why not?" Eleanor asked, setting her single carpetbag on the narrow bed. Mrs. Fletcher shrugged. "Ryder's fair, but he's not friendly. Pays well, feeds them decent, but he doesn't talk much, doesn't socialize. Some men find that peculiar. Plus, the ranch is isolated. 10 miles from town, might as well be 100 for some folks." Eleanor thought about those lonely eyes and understood a bit better. Losing your family in such a violent way would mark anyone, especially at 17. That was 11 or 12 years of solitude, of building walls to protect whatever remained of your heart. "How long are you planning to stay in Alpine, Mrs. Sutton?" Mrs. Fletcher asked. "I'm not sure yet. I need to find work, see if I can make a living here." "What kind of work are you looking for?" Eleanor explained about her preserves, her skill with cooking and baking, her desperation to support herself. Mrs. Fletcher listened thoughtfully. "I might have an idea," the older woman said, "but first you should rest. You look like you've been traveling hard. We have supper at 6, nothing fancy but it's filling. You can meet the other boarders, get a feel for the town." Eleanor thanked her and closed the door after Mrs. Fletcher left. She sat on the bed, the coins from Ryder Yates heavy in her pocket, and allowed herself a moment to simply breathe. She'd made it. She'd traveled 200 miles, sold her entire inventory, and secured a place to sleep. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had this morning. That night at supper, Eleanor met the other boarders. There was Mr. Patterson, whose wife took in laundry, a traveling salesman named Mr. Cook, who was only in town for a few days, and 2 older women, sisters named Martha and Me, who were school teachers. They welcomed Eleanor warmly, curious about her but polite enough not to pry too deeply. "Are you married, dear?" Martha asked, then immediately looked stricken. "Oh, forgive me, that's none of my business." "I was," Eleanor said quietly. "My husband passed away last winter, consumption." "I'm so sorry," Me said, reaching across the table to pat Eleanor's hand. That must have been terribly difficult. It had been, though in ways Eleanor didn't fully know how to articulate. She'd loved James Sutton, but theirs had been a practical marriage more than a passionate one. He'd been a clerk, steady and kind, and when he'd proposed, Eleanor had been 21 and worried about becoming a burden to her aging parents. They'd had 3 years together, comfortable if not exciting, and she'd mourned him sincerely. But sometimes, in her most private thoughts, she wondered what it would be like to feel the kind of love the poets wrote about, the kind that set your blood on fire and made your heart race. After supper, Mrs. Fletcher pulled Eleanor aside. "I spoke to Jack Morrison, who runs the restaurant. He said he might be able to use you a few days a week, helping with the baking. He's particularly interested if you can make pies. Apparently, his pies are terrible and everyone knows it." Eleanor felt hope bloom in her chest. "I can make pies. My mother taught me, and I've been baking since I was a girl." "Then go see him tomorrow morning. The restaurant opens at 6, but he's usually there by 5, getting the stove heated and the coffee started." That night, Eleanor lay in her narrow bed and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of Alpine settling in for the night. Somewhere a dog barked. Voices drifted up from the saloon down the street. A wagon rattled past. And through it all, she found herself thinking about Ryder Yates, about the loneliness in his eyes and the unexpected kindness he'd shown her. She told herself it was merely gratitude, nothing more, but as she drifted off to sleep, she found herself wondering if she'd see him again. The next morning, Eleanor presented herself at Morrison's restaurant at 5:30, dressed in her best dress, which wasn't saying much, and with her hair properly pinned. Jack Morrison turned out to be a gruff man in his 50s with a magnificent mustache and a perpetual frown. "Mrs. Fletcher says you can bake," he said without preamble. "Yes, sir. Pies, cakes, cookies, bread. I'm experienced with all of it. Make me a pie right now. There's the ingredients, there's the stove. Show me what you can do." It was a test, and Eleanor knew it. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work, feeling more comfortable in a kitchen than she had anywhere else in the past few days. She made an apple pie, using the preserves techniques she knew to create a filling that was perfectly balanced between sweet and tart, the crust flaky and golden. It took her just over an hour, working efficiently in the unfamiliar space. Jack Morrison cut himself a slice the moment it was cool enough to eat. He chewed thoughtfully, his expression giving nothing away. Then he cut another slice. "You're hired," he said. 4 days a week to start. Tuesday through Friday, 5 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. I'll pay you 50 cents a day." It wasn't a fortune, but it was steady work and honest pay. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. You won't regret this." "I better not. I've got a reputation to maintain, such as it is." Eleanor started work the next day, falling into a routine that was exhausting but satisfying. She baked pies, lots of pies in every variety she could manage with the available ingredients. Apple, peach, cherry when Mr. Morrison could get them, even vinegar pie when fresh fruit was scarce. She also made cakes and cookies, and soon people were coming to Morrison's specifically for dessert. 2 weeks passed. Eleanor settled into life in Alpine, making friends with the schoolteachers and Mrs. Fletcher, earning enough to pay her rent and even save a little. She returned the borrowed wagon to the freight company that ran between Alpine and Fort Davis, paying them for the rental with some of her earnings. Life had found a new rhythm, and while Eleanor missed the familiarity of Santa Fe, she found herself growing fond of Alpine's rough charm and genuine people. She didn't see Ryder Yates during those 2 weeks, though she heard about him. The ranch hands who worked for him came to town occasionally, and they spoke of him with respect if not warmth. He was fair, they said, demanding but never unreasonable. He paid on time and didn't cheat them. But he was also distant, spending most of his time alone, riding his property or working on projects by himself rather than with the crew. "Ryder don't trust easy. one of the cowboys told Eleanor when she asked casually while serving him pie one afternoon. Can't say I blame him after what happened to his family, but it makes for lonely living, I reckon. Eleanor thought about that conversation later as she walked back to the boarding house. What must it be like to lose everyone you loved in one terrible moment? How did you recover from something like that? Did you ever fully recover? Or did you just learn to carry the weight of it? She was so lost in thought that she nearly walked right past him. Ryder Yates stood outside the general store, loading supplies into his wagon, and when he saw her, he went very still. "Mrs. Sutton," he said, touching his hat brim in that same gesture of acknowledgement. "Mr. Yates." Eleanor felt her heart do something strange in her chest. "How are the preserves?" "Good. Real good, actually. The men have been going through them faster than I expected." "I'm glad to hear it." She meant to walk on, to leave it at that polite exchange, but instead she found herself saying, "I started working at Morrison's restaurant. Baking, mostly pies. I heard. Also heard your pies are about the best thing anyone's tasted in Alpine for years." Eleanor felt herself blush. "That's very kind, though I suspect Mr. Morrison's previous attempts set a fairly low standard." Was that almost a smile again? It was hard to tell. "Maybe so. But from what I hear, your pies would be good anywhere." They stood there in the dusty street, and Eleanor became aware that people were watching them, curious about this interaction between the lonely rancher and the new widow. It shouldn't matter what people thought, but Eleanor had been raised to care about her reputation, and a widow needed to be especially careful. "I should go," she said. "But thank you again, Mr. Yates, for buying my preserves. I don't think I properly expressed how much that helped me." "You thanked me at the time. That was sufficient." He hesitated, then added, "You settling in all right then? Finding Alpine agreeable?" "I am. Everyone has been very welcoming." "Good, that's good." Another pause, awkward and weighted. "Well, I should finish loading up. Got a long ride back." "Of course. Safe travels, Mr. Yates." Eleanor walked away feeling strangely disappointed, though she couldn't have said what she'd expected or hoped for. It was just a conversation, a brief exchange of pleasantries. Nothing more. But that night, lying in bed, she found herself thinking about him again. About the careful way he'd handled her jars of preserves. About the loneliness in his eyes. About the way he'd gone still when he saw her, as if her presence had surprised him into immobility. "Stop it," she told herself firmly. "You're being foolish. He's a customer, nothing more. And you're in no position to be entertaining romantic notions about anyone." Still, when she finally slept, she dreamed of gray eyes and rough hands gentle on glass jars. The next day was Saturday, which meant Eleanor didn't work. She spent the morning helping Mrs. Fletcher with various tasks around the boarding house, grateful for the older woman's kindness and wanting to repay it however she could. In the afternoon, Martha and me invited her to walk with them around town, and Eleanor accepted, enjoying the mild weather and the company. They were passing the church when Reverend Thomas called out to Eleanor, "Mrs. Sutton, might I have a word?" The Reverend was an earnest young man, probably not much older than Eleanor herself, who'd come to Alpine the previous year with his even younger wife. Eleanor had attended services the past 2 Sundays and found his sermons thoughtful if a bit long-winded. "Of course, Reverend. I've been hearing wonderful things about your baking," he said with an enthusiastic smile. "The church is planning a social next month, and I wondered if you might be willing to contribute some pies. We could pay you, of course." "I'd be happy to help," Eleanor said. "And there's no need for payment. I'd like to contribute to the church." "That's very generous of you, Mrs. Sutton, very generous indeed." He lowered his voice slightly. I also wanted to mention that we have a number of God-fearing single men in our congregation who might be interested in making your acquaintance if you were amenable to introductions. A woman alone faces many difficulties, and a good marriage can be a blessing. Eleanor stiffened slightly. She knew the Reverend meant well, that he was following the conventions of the time, but something about his assumption rankled her. "That's kind of you, Reverend, but I'm not looking to remarry at present. My husband has been gone less than a year." Of course. I meant no disrespect. Simply wanted you to know that when you are ready, the church community is here to support you. After they parted ways, Me gave Eleanor a sympathetic look. "Don't mind him too much, dear. He means well, but he's young and sometimes forgets that not every woman's sole ambition is to be married." "I don't object to marriage," Eleanor said carefully. "I just want it to be my choice in my own time, and preferably with someone I actually care for, not just because it's practical." "That's a radical notion in some circles," Martha said with a smile, "but I happen to agree with you entirely." That evening, as Eleanor helped Mrs. Fletcher prepare supper for the boarders, the older woman said casually, "Saw you talking to Ryder Yates yesterday." "Yes, we ran into each other outside the general store. He doesn't usually linger in town. Must have had a reason to stay." Eleanor looked up from the potatoes she was peeling. "Are you suggesting something, Mrs. Fletcher? Just making an observation. Ryder's been alone a long time, maybe too long. And you're a fine woman, Eleanor, kind and hard-working and pretty besides. Mrs. Fletcher, I barely know Mr. Yates." "We've spoken perhaps 3 times very briefly. Sometimes that's all it takes, just a spark, a recognition of something in another person." Mrs. Fletcher smiled. "My late husband and I spoke exactly once before he proposed. I turned him down, of course. But he persisted, and the second time he asked, I said yes. We had 32 good years before the fever took him." Eleanor wanted to protest further, to insist that Mrs. Fletcher was reading far too much into a simple transaction and a couple of polite conversations. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the memory of those gray eyes. Maybe it was the way her heart had jumped when she'd seen him outside the store. Or maybe it was simply that Eleanor was tired of being practical, of always doing the sensible thing, and some part of her wanted to believe in the possibility of something more. The church social that Reverend Thomas had mentioned came together quickly. The whole town seemed excited about it, eager for any excuse to gather and socialize. Eleanor spent the day before baking 6 pies, using Morrison's kitchen with his permission, determined to make her contribution something special. On the day of the social, she wore her second-best dress, dark green calico that brought out her eyes, and let me help her arrange her hair in a more elaborate style than her usual simple bun. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman looking back. She looked younger, softer, more hopeful than she'd felt in months. The social was held in the church hall, a simple wooden structure attached to the church itself. Long tables had been set up and covered with every kind of food imaginable. The women of Alpine had clearly gone to great effort, and the result was a feast that made Eleanor's mouth water. Her pies took their place among the desserts, looking respectable if not fancy. The hall filled quickly with families, couples, children running between the tables while their mothers tried ineffectively to calm them. Eleanor recognized faces from the restaurant, people she'd served pie to or seen around town. They greeted her warmly, made her feel welcome, and she felt a rush of affection for this rough little town that had given her a chance when she'd needed it most. She was talking to Martha and me, enjoying a plate of food, when she felt someone's gaze on her. Eleanor turned and found Ryder Yates standing in the doorway, looking profoundly uncomfortable in clean clothes and with his hair properly combed. He scanned the crowd with an expression that suggested he was seriously considering leaving, and Eleanor found herself moving toward him before she'd consciously decided to do so. "Mr. Yates," she said warmly, "I didn't expect to see you here." He focused on her with something that looked like relief. "Mrs. Fletcher mentioned it when I was in town earlier, said the whole town would be here, thought I should make an appearance. I'm glad you did. Have you gotten food yet?" "No, I just arrived. Honestly, I'm not sure I'm going to stay." Not much for socializing. Eleanor made a decision then, driven by impulse and something deeper she didn't want to examine too closely. "Then let's get you a plate and find somewhere quieter to sit. You came all this way, you should at least eat something." She led him through the crowd, filling plates for both of them, deliberately choosing foods she thought he might enjoy. They found chairs in a corner, slightly removed from the main gathering, and settled in. Ryder ate with the focused attention of someone who wasn't used to social niceties, and Eleanor found herself watching his hands. They were large and scarred from work, but they held his fork with surprising delicacy. "This is good," he said after a while. "All of it. Don't usually eat like this." "The women of Alpine are excellent cooks. I feel like my pies are nothing special compared to some of these dishes." "Haven't tried your pie yet." "Well, you should. I made 6 of them specifically for this event." "Which ones are yours?" Eleanor pointed them out on the dessert table. "The 3 apple and 3 peach. I wanted to use the preserves I didn't sell, the ones I kept for myself." Ryder looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You used your own preserves for pies for people you barely know. They're my neighbors now. And besides, preserves are meant to be used, not hoarded." He was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "You're a kind woman, Mrs. Sutton. Eleanor. You should call me Eleanor. Then you should call me Ryder." It felt like a significant exchange, though Eleanor couldn't have explained why. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the social swirl around them. Children played games in one corner while adults talked and laughed. Someone had brought a fiddle and music started up, couples forming for dancing. "You dance, Ryder?" Eleanor asked. He looked horrified. "Not if I can help it. Never been much good at it." "Neither have I, truthfully. My husband tried to teach me a few times, but I have 2 left feet." "Your husband," Ryder said carefully. "Mrs. Fletcher mentioned you'd been widowed. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you. It's been 8 months now. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. That's grief. It plays tricks with time." There was something in his voice that made Eleanor look at him more closely. "You sound like you're speaking from experience. My family. The Comanche raid. It was 12 years ago, but some days I can still hear it. The screaming. The gunfire." He stopped abruptly, looking surprised that he'd said so much. Eleanor reached out without thinking and placed her hand on his arm. She felt the muscles tense under her fingers, then slowly relax. "I'm so sorry, Ryder. I can't imagine how terrible that must have been. I was supposed to be there. I'd ridden out to check on some cattle in the far pasture. If I'd been at the house, I'd have died with them. Or maybe I could have saved them. I'll never know." He looked down at her hand on his arm, but he didn't pull away. "That's why I don't come to town much. Too many people asking questions, giving sympathy. After a while, you just want people to let you forget. Except you can't forget, can you? No, you can't forget." They sat like that for a long moment, Eleanor's hand on Ryder's arm, connected by shared grief and understanding. Around them, the social continued in full swing, but in their quiet corner it felt like they were alone together. Then Reverend Thomas approached with a wide smile, and a man Eleanor vaguely recognized from church. "Mrs. Sutton, I wanted to introduce you to Mr. Henry Walsh. He owns the feed store and has been eager to make your acquaintance." Henry Walsh was perhaps 40, with thinning hair and a prosperous paunch. He smiled at Eleanor with unmistakable interest, completely ignoring Ryder. "Mrs. Sutton, I've heard wonderful things about your baking. I wonder if you might honor me with a dance." Eleanor wanted to refuse, but social convention was a powerful force. She withdrew her hand from Ryder's arm and stood. "Of course, Mr. Walsh. That would be lovely." She glanced back at Ryder as Henry Walsh led her to the dancing area, and what she saw in his face made her heart ache. He looked bereft, as if something precious had been taken from him, but also resigned, as if this was exactly what he'd expected to happen. Henry Walsh was a competent dancer and a pleasant enough companion, but Eleanor found her attention drifting. She could see Ryder still sitting in the corner, now staring at his plate with fixed intensity. When the dance ended, Henry Walsh thanked her effusively and asked if he might call on her sometime. Eleanor gave a non-committal answer and excused herself, intending to return to Ryder. But Reverend Thomas intercepted her again, this time with a different man, and then another. Eleanor found herself passed from partner to partner, making polite conversation, dancing until her feet ached. Each time she looked for Ryder, he was still sitting alone, and each time their eyes met, she saw that loneliness deepen. Finally, after what felt like hours, Eleanor managed to break free. She grabbed 2 slices of pie and made her way back to the corner, but Ryder was gone. She looked around the hall, hoping to spot him in the crowd, but he'd vanished. Mrs. Fletcher appeared at her elbow. "He left about 10 minutes ago. Looked like a man heading for the gallows. I shouldn't have left him alone. You were being polite." "But Eleanor, if you care for that man at all, you should know that he won't fight for your attention. He's spent 12 years convincing himself he doesn't deserve happiness. You'll have to be the one to push." Eleanor looked down at the 2 plates of pie in her hands, feeling something harden into determination in her chest. "Where exactly is his ranch?" Mrs. Fletcher smiled. 10 miles north on the main road. There's a wooden sign with the brand, a Y inside a circle. You can't miss it." The next day was Sunday, which meant Eleanor attended church services. She'd woken with a plan forming in her mind, reckless and improper and absolutely necessary. After the service, she sought out Mr. Morrison. "I need Monday off," she told him. "I know it's short notice, but it's important." Jack Morrison studied her face, then grunted. "This have anything to do with Ryder Yates? Is nothing private in this town?" "Not much, no. Take your day. But be back Tuesday morning or I'll have to dock your pay." Eleanor spent Sunday afternoon preparing. She baked 2 pies, made a basket of fried chicken, packed fresh bread and butter. She borrowed Mrs. Fletcher's best dishes and wrapped everything carefully. Monday morning, before dawn, she rented a horse from the livery stable, having learned to ride as a girl, and set out north with her basket of food tied securely behind the saddle. The ride to Ryder's ranch took her just over 2 hours, the sun climbing steadily as she followed the dusty road through the increasingly sparse landscape. The Davis Mountains rose around her, beautiful and harsh, and she understood why someone might choose to live out here, far from the complications of town life. The ranch itself was larger than she'd expected. The main house was a sturdy 2-story structure built from local stone, with a wide porch and shuttered windows. Outbuildings dotted the property, including a large barn, several corrals, and what looked like a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and she could see a few men working near the barn, but the main house looked quiet. Eleanor dismounted, tied her horse to the porch rail, and approached the door with her basket. Her heart hammered so hard she felt dizzy. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. What was she doing? This was wildly improper. A single woman didn't visit a single man alone at his ranch. The scandal would be enormous if anyone found out, but before she could talk herself out of it, the door opened. Ryder stood there in work clothes, his hair disheveled, his expression startled. "Eleanor, what are you doing here? You left the social before you could try my pie," she said, lifting the basket. "I brought you some, and chicken, and bread. May I come in?" Ryder looked torn between proper concern for her reputation and genuine pleasure at seeing her. Pleasure won. "Of course. Come in." The interior of the house was surprisingly well maintained, clean if sparse. The main room had a large fireplace, a few chairs, a sturdy table. It was the home of a man who lived alone but took pride in his space. Ryder cleared papers from the table, looking flustered, while Eleanor set down her basket and began unpacking. "You shouldn't have ridden out here alone," Ryder said. "It's not safe. There's still occasional trouble with rustlers, and a woman alone is vulnerable." "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself," Eleanor said, though she appreciated his concern. "Besides, I needed to talk to you and you left before we could finish our conversation." "We were finished." "You had other interested parties to attend to." Eleanor turned to look at him fully. "Is that what you think? That I was interested in Mr. Walsh or any of those other men?" "Why wouldn't you be? Walsh owns a successful business. He could provide for you, give you security. You'd be foolish not to consider him. And yet I rode 10 miles to see you instead." Eleanor moved closer, emboldened by the vulnerability in his eyes. "Ryder, I'm not looking for security or practicality. I had that in my first marriage, and while I cared for James, it was never passionate. I want something more this time. I want to feel something." "Eleanor." Her name came out rough, almost pained. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying that when I saw you at the social, alone in that corner, it made my heart hurt. I'm saying that I've thought about you nearly every day since you bought all my preserves. I'm saying that I rode out here alone, propriety be damned, because I couldn't stand the thought of you believing I didn't care." Ryder stared at her, and Eleanor watched a dozen emotions cross his face. Disbelief, hope, fear, longing. "You barely know me. Then let me get to know you. Let me spend time with you. Let me see who you are beneath all that loneliness and pain." "I'm not good at this," he said quietly. "Talking, socializing, being what a woman needs. I've been alone so long I don't remember how to be anything else." Eleanor reached out and took his hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and strong. "I don't need you to be anything other than honest. Talk to me, Ryder. Tell me about your life, your ranch, what you do with your days. Let me in, even just a little." They sat at his table and Eleanor served the food she'd brought. As they ate, Ryder began to talk, slowly at first, then with increasing ease. He told her about the ranch, how it had been in his family for 2 generations, how he'd struggled to keep it running after his family died. He spoke of the cattle, the endless work, the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. He talked about the loneliness too, the way silence could be both comfort and curse. Eleanor listened, asking questions, sharing her own stories in return. She told him about growing up in Santa Fe, about her parents who'd passed from influenza, about her marriage to James, and how they'd built a quiet life together until consumption stole it away. She spoke of her fear when she'd realized she had nothing left, her desperation to find a way forward, the relief and gratitude when Ryder had bought all her preserves. "I knew you were doing it to help me," she said softly. "No one needs 48 jars of preserves. But you saw I needed help and you gave it without making me feel like charity. That meant more than you could know." "I saw a woman with courage," Ryder said. "You traveled 200 miles alone to start over. That takes real strength. I admired it. And I saw a man with kindness hiding behind walls. I wanted to know that man better. They talked for hours, the conversation flowing easier than Eleanor would have thought possible. Ryder showed her around the ranch, introducing her to his few remaining hands, men who looked stunned to see their boss with a woman. They walked along a creek that ran through the property, the water low in the summer heat, but still providing some greenery in the otherwise brown landscape. "It's beautiful here," Eleanor said. "Harsh but beautiful. I can see why you love it." "It's all I have," Ryder admitted. "This land, these cattle. After my family died, I threw myself into the ranch. It was the only thing that made sense, the only thing I could control. And now—" He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Now I'm starting to think there might be something else worth caring about." The sun was lowering toward the horizon when Eleanor realized how late it had gotten. "I should go. I need to get back before dark." "Stay." The word hung in the air between them. Eleanor's eyes widened. "Ryder, I can't. It wouldn't be proper." "I don't mean like that. I mean stay for supper. Let me cook for you for once, instead of always being the one receiving your food. Then I'll ride back with you, make sure you get to town safely." Please. She should refuse. She should insist on leaving immediately, on preserving what remained of her reputation. But Eleanor found she didn't want to. She wanted more time with this man, more conversations, more of the connection she felt growing between them. "All right," she said. "But only if you let me help cook." They prepared supper together in his kitchen, and Eleanor was surprised to discover Ryder was a competent cook, if limited in his repertoire. They made a simple meal of steak, potatoes, and greens from a small garden behind the house. As they worked side by side, their hands occasionally brushing, Eleanor felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the stove. After they ate, Ryder saddled his horse and they rode back to Alpine together, the journey passing in comfortable conversation. The stars had come out by the time they reached the boarding house, brilliant in the dark Texas sky. "Thank you for today," Ryder said as Eleanor dismounted. "It was the best day I've had in 12 years. Eleanor's heart swelled. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the roughness of his stubble under her palm. "Then let's have more days like it. Come to town next Sunday. We'll go to church together, then have dinner. Let people see that we're courting. You want that. People will talk. They'll say you could do better than a hermit rancher. Let them talk. I know what I want, Ryder. The question is, do you?" He turned his face into her palm, the gesture achingly tender. "I want you. God help me, I want you more than I've wanted anything in years. But Eleanor, I'm not an easy man. I have bad days, dark moods. The memories still haunt me. I might not be able to give you everything you deserve. I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for honesty and effort. Can you give me that?" "Yes, I can give you that," Eleanor smiled. "Then we'll figure out the rest together." True to his word, Ryder came to town the following Sunday. He sat with Eleanor in church, enduring the curious stares and whispered speculation with admirable composure. After the service, they walked together to Morrison's restaurant, where Jack Morrison served them dinner with a knowing grin. "About time someone got through to you, Ryder," the restaurant owner said. "Been eating alone too long." Word spread quickly through Alpine that Ryder Yates and the widow Sutton were courting. Eleanor found herself fielding questions from well-meaning townspeople, and for the most part, the reaction was positive. Mrs. Fletcher was delighted, practically crowing with satisfaction that her observation had proven correct. Martha and me thought it wonderfully romantic. Even Reverend Thomas, though he looked slightly disappointed that Eleanor had chosen Ryder over more suitable prospects like Henry Walsh, offered his blessing. Not everyone approved. A few people muttered that Eleanor should have observed a full year of mourning before courting, that it was unseemly for her to be so forward. Others worried that Ryder was too damaged, too isolated, that he'd make her unhappy. But Eleanor had spent too much of her life worrying about what others thought. She knew her own heart, and her heart wanted Ryder Yates. They fell into a pattern over the following weeks. Ryder came to town every Sunday, and sometimes on Saturdays too. They took walks together, ate meals at the restaurant, attended church socials and town events. Slowly, Eleanor watched Ryder begin to open up, not just to her but to others. He started talking more with the townspeople, accepting invitations, participating in the community in ways he hadn't for 12 years. Eleanor also visited the ranch regularly now, no longer worried about propriety since their courtship was public knowledge. She grew to love those visits, the peace of the open land, the satisfaction of seeing Ryder in his element. She met all his ranch hands, learned their names and stories, and started bringing enough baked goods for everyone when she visited. The men began calling her Mrs. Sutton with a warmth that suggested they hoped she'd become Mrs. Yates soon. 6 weeks into their courtship, Ryder asked Eleanor to take a ride with him to a place he wanted to show her. They rode for about an hour into the hills behind his ranch, climbing steadily until they reached a plateau with a breathtaking view of the valley below. The ranch spread out beneath them, looking peaceful and prosperous in the late afternoon light. "This is where I come when things get dark," Ryder told her. "When the memories are too heavy and I need perspective. Up here I can see how far I've come, how much I've built. It helps." "It's beautiful," Eleanor said softly. "I want to bring you here when I'm struggling," Ryder continued. "I want you to know that some days will be hard. Some days I'll wake up and all I'll see is blood and fire. I'll push you away without meaning to. But I'm trying, Eleanor. I'm trying to be better, to be worthy of what you're offering me." Eleanor dismounted and went to him, waiting until he dismounted too so she could take his hands in hers. "Ryder, you don't have to be worthy. You just have to be yourself. And on the hard days, I won't let you push me away. I'll be here steady and patient until you find your way back." "How did I get this lucky?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "We both got lucky. We found each other when we both needed someone who understood what it meant to survive loss and keep going." Ryder pulled her close then, wrapping his arms around her. Eleanor pressed her face against his chest, hearing the steady thud of his heartbeat, feeling the warmth of his body against hers. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other on the wind-swept plateau, two lonely souls finding comfort in connection. "Eleanor," Ryder said finally, "I love you. I know it's fast, maybe too fast, but I can't pretend otherwise. I love you and I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" Eleanor pulled back enough to look up at his face. His gray eyes were vulnerable, hopeful, terrified. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you. I love you too, Ryder. So much it scares me sometimes." He kissed her then, a kiss full of tenderness and promise and desperate relief. Eleanor kissed him back, pouring all her feelings into it. This man who'd been so lonely and who'd opened his heart to her despite the risk. They were married a month later in the small church in Alpine, with what felt like the entire town in attendance. Martha and me helped Eleanor make her wedding dress, a simple but beautiful gown in cream-colored silk that Mrs. Fletcher produced from a trunk of her late daughter's belongings. Jack Morrison closed his restaurant for the day to attend and insisted on providing the wedding cake. The ranch hands all came, dressed in their Sunday best, grinning at their boss who looked terrified and overjoyed in equal measure. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up made Eleanor laugh with pure joy. Ryder kissed her soundly, no longer caring who saw or what they thought, and Eleanor felt like her heart might burst with happiness. The wedding breakfast was held at the church hall, much like the social where they'd first really talked, and this time Ryder didn't sit in the corner. He stayed by Eleanor's side, accepting congratulations with visible pleasure, even managing to smile and laugh at the gentle teasing from the townspeople who'd known him his whole life. "Never thought I'd see the day," one old-timer said, clapping Ryder on the shoulder. "Ryder Yates married and looking happy about it. Your parents would be so proud, son." Something flickered across Ryder's face at the mention of his parents, but Eleanor squeezed his hand and the moment passed. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. That means a lot." They spent their wedding night at the ranch, and Eleanor finally saw the bedroom that would now be hers too. Ryder had clearly made an effort, with fresh linens on the bed and wildflowers in a jar on the dresser. It was sweet and awkward and perfect, two people learning each other, finding their way together. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, Eleanor's head on Ryder's chest, his fingers running through her unbound hair. "Are you happy?" Ryder asked quietly. "Happier than I've ever been," Eleanor said honestly. I didn't think I could feel this way again. Happy, hopeful, like the future might hold good things instead of just endless work and loneliness." "The future holds us," Eleanor said. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Life settled into new rhythms. Eleanor kept her job at Morrison's for a few months, not wanting to give up her independence entirely, but eventually she left to focus on the ranch. She discovered she loved ranch life, the wide open spaces, the constant work, the satisfaction of building something lasting. She kept chickens, expanded the garden, learned to help with the cattle when needed. She also started a small preserve-making operation, selling jars in town and even shipping some to Fort Davis, building a modest income of her own. The ranch hands, initially wary of having the boss's wife around, came to respect and care for Eleanor. She made sure they were well-fed, tended minor injuries, and treated them with dignity. Several men who'd been planning to move on decided to stay, and for the first time in years, Ryder had a stable, loyal crew, but it wasn't all easy. Ryder had warned her about his dark days, and Eleanor discovered he'd been telling the truth. Sometimes he woke from nightmares, shaking and disoriented. Sometimes he'd go quiet for days, lost in memories she couldn't reach. At first, Eleanor didn't know how to help, but she learned. She learned when to push and when to give him space. She learned to talk him through the panic, to ground him in the present, to remind him that he was safe and loved. "Thank you," he said one night after a particularly bad episode, "for not giving up on me." "I'll never give up on you," Eleanor promised. "We're in this together, remember, for better or worse." Winter came, cold and harsh by Texas standards. The ranch work became more difficult, but Eleanor found she didn't mind. She loved sitting by the fire in the evenings with Ryder, talking about their days, making plans for the spring. They read together, her teaching him to appreciate novels he'd never bothered with before, him sharing his extensive knowledge of ranching and the land. In late December, Eleanor realized her monthly cycle was late. She waited another week, not wanting to raise hopes prematurely, then told Ryder one evening over dinner, "I think I might be with child." Ryder went very still, his fork halfway to his mouth. "You're sure?" "Not completely, but fairly sure." He set down his fork carefully, then came around the table and knelt beside her chair. "A child, our child." Eleanor saw fear flash across his face, understood it immediately. He was thinking of his own family, of what he'd lost, of the danger that always lurked in this harsh land. "Nothing will happen to us," she said firmly. "We're going to be fine. Our child will grow up safe and loved." "I can't lose you," Ryder said, his voice breaking. "Eleanor, I can't survive losing you. You won't have to. I'm strong and healthy. Women have babies every day. Everything will be all right. Over the following months, as Eleanor's belly swelled with their growing child, Ryder became increasingly protective. He insisted she rest more, stop doing heavy work, avoid anything that might be dangerous. It was sweet but also occasionally infuriating, and they had their first real arguments about it. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Eleanor said after Ryder forbade her from riding. "I need exercise and fresh air. I need you safe, both of you. And wrapping me in cotton wool isn't going to keep us safe. It's just going to make me miserable. Please, Ryder, trust me to know my own limits." They compromised, Eleanor agreeing to be more careful and Ryder agreeing to stop hovering quite so much. As her time drew nearer, they prepared a nursery in one of the spare rooms, painting it cheerful yellow and building a cradle from wood Ryder had been saving for something special. Eleanor's labor started on a warm June evening in 1884, almost exactly a year after she'd first arrived in Alpine. Mrs. Fletcher came to the ranch to assist, along with the doctor from Alpine. Ryder paced outside the bedroom, terrified and useless, while Eleanor labored through the night. Just after dawn, his son was born, healthy and loud. When the doctor brought the baby out wrapped in a blanket, Ryder stared at the tiny face in wonder. "A boy," the doctor said with a smile. "Congratulations, Ryder. Is Eleanor all right? She's tired but fine, asking for you." Ryder went into the bedroom on shaking legs. Eleanor lay propped up on pillows, pale and exhausted but smiling. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Ryder sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby in her arms, his son. The reality of it crashed over him like a wave. This tiny person was his responsibility, his to protect and raise and love. The fear of it was immense, but so was the joy. "What should we name him?" Eleanor asked. They'd discussed names but never quite decided. Now, looking at the baby's small, perfect face, Ryder knew. "James. After your husband. He was a good man and he made you who you are. Our son should carry that honor." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "James Yates, I love it, but we should give him a middle name too. What about Thomas after your father, James Thomas Yates?" Ryder tested the name, finding it fit perfectly. "It's good. It's right." Little James proved to be a happy baby, easy-going and content. Eleanor recovered quickly from the birth, and within weeks, she was back to her normal activities, though now with a baby often strapped to her back or sleeping in a basket nearby. Ryder was a devoted father, utterly besotted with his son. The ranch hands teased him mercilessly about it, but Ryder didn't care. He'd never expected to have this, a family of his own, a second chance at the life that had been stolen from him at 17. As James grew from baby to toddler, he became the center of their world. He had his mother's sunny disposition and his father's gray eyes, and he loved the ranch with a passion that delighted Ryder. They taught him to ride almost before he could walk, and by the time he was 3, he could sit a horse with confidence. Life was good, better than Eleanor had ever imagined that desperate day when she'd arrived in Alpine with nothing but preserves to sell. She'd found not just survival but joy, not just security but passion, not just a husband but a true partner. Ryder had transformed from the lonely, damaged man she'd first met into someone more open and whole, though he still had his difficult days. But they faced those days together, and that made all the difference. When James was 4, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This time, Ryder handled the news with more equanimity, his previous experience making him less panicked. Their daughter, Rebecca Sarah Yates, was born in early 1889, a tiny thing with dark blonde hair like her mother and a stubborn streak that promised interesting years ahead. James adored his baby sister, though he was occasionally frustrated by how much attention she required. Eleanor found herself busier than ever, managing 2 children and the ranch work, but she thrived on it. This was the life she'd built, the family she'd created with Ryder, and every exhausting, chaotic, wonderful day was a gift. The ranch prospered too. Ryder's careful management and the stability Eleanor brought to their lives translated to steady growth. They expanded their herd, bought additional land, hired more permanent hands who became almost like family. Eleanor's preserve business grew as well, her products becoming known throughout West Texas for their quality. She trained several other women in Alpine to help with production, creating employment and community in the process. On a warm summer evening in 1891, Eleanor stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the Davis Mountains in shades of gold and purple. James, now 7, was helping his father with the evening chores, both of them visible in the distance. Rebecca played at Eleanor's feet with a rag doll. Eleanor rested a hand on her belly, where a third child grew, due in the fall. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. The desperate woman selling preserves from a borrowed wagon, the lonely cowboy who'd seen past his own pain long enough to show kindness to a stranger. She thought about all the small moments that had led to this, the conversations and decisions, the risks taken and rewards earned. "Mama, look!" Rebecca held up her doll triumphantly. "She can stand!" "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Eleanor said, scooping up her daughter for a hug. Ryder and James returned from the barn, both dusty and happy. James immediately started telling Eleanor an elaborate story about the calf he'd helped feed, while Ryder climbed the porch steps and pulled her close, careful of her growing belly. "Good day?" he asked softly. "The best," Eleanor said. "Every day with you is the best. Still can't believe your mind sometimes, that this is all real. Believe it. You're stuck with me, Ryder Yates." He kissed her then, sweet and tender, a kiss full of the love they'd built over 8 years together. When they pulled apart, James was making exaggerated gagging sounds and Rebecca was giggling. "Come on, you two," Eleanor said with a laugh. "Let's get washed up for supper." They went inside, all 4 of them together, a family forged from loneliness and loss into something strong and lasting. That night, after the children were asleep, Eleanor and Ryder sat on the porch in the cool evening air. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Eleanor asked. "When I showed up trying to sell preserves, all the time, best 48 jars I ever bought. You bought my preserves and my affection too, you know, all in one purchase." Ryder smiled, that rare, full smile that still made Eleanor's heart skip. "Best deal I ever made then, worth every penny and more." "I love you, Ryder." "I love you too, Eleanor, more than I can put into words." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast Texas sky. Inside, their children slept safe and warm. Around them, the ranch they'd built together stretched out into the darkness, solid and prosperous. And in Eleanor's belly, new life grew, a testament to their love and the future they'd created. The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and joys. The third child, a boy they named Michael, arrived that fall as expected, healthy and loud. The ranch continued to grow, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. James grew into a fine young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day operations. Rebecca proved to be as stubborn and capable as predicted, with a head for numbers that made her invaluable in managing the business side of things. Michael, the baby, had a gentle soul and a way with horses that was almost magical. Eleanor's preserve business expanded beyond her wildest expectations. By the mid-1890s, her products were sold throughout Texas and even into neighboring states. She employed a dozen women from Alpine and the surrounding area, providing them with steady income and dignity. The business became her pride, separate from but complementary to the ranch. Ryder continued to have his dark days, but they grew less frequent and less intense as the years went on. The nightmares never completely stopped, but Eleanor was always there to hold him through them, to remind him that he was safe, that he was loved, that he'd survived and built something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. In 1898, James married a local girl named Sarah, and they built a house on the ranch property. Their first child, a daughter, arrived the following year, making Ryder and Eleanor grandparents at ages 44 and 39 respectively. Ryder cried when he held his granddaughter for the first time, overwhelmed by the continuation of the family line he'd thought dead forever. Eleanor watched her husband with their granddaughter and felt her heart swell with love and pride. They'd done this. They'd built this family, this legacy, from nothing but desperation and kindness. That day in Alpine when she'd arrived to sell preserves had changed everything, and not just because it had brought them together. It had been the start of healing for both of them, the beginning of learning to trust and hope and love again. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1904, Ryder took Eleanor back to the plateau where he'd proposed. They were older now, both showing gray in their hair, lines on their faces earned through 2 decades of hard work and harder laughter. But the love between them had only deepened, enriched by time and shared experience. 20 years, Eleanor said, looking out over the valley. Can you believe it? Some days yes, some days no. Feels like yesterday and forever both at the same time. Do you remember what you said to me up here? That you wanted to bring me here when things got dark. I remember, and I have, haven't I? Brought you here when I was struggling, let you help me find my way back. And I always will, for as many years as we have left. Ryder pulled her close, and they stood watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Below them, the ranch spread out, home to 3 generations now, a testament to survival and stubborn hope. I'm glad you came to Alpine to sell preserves, Ryder said softly. Eleanor laughed. I'm glad you bought them all. Best business transaction of my life. Mine too. Though I'd argue I got the better end of the deal. We both won, Ryder. That's the beauty of it. We both won. They stayed on the plateau until the stars came out, then rode back to the ranch house that had been their home for 20 years. Inside, they could hear laughter from where James and Sarah were visiting with their 3 children, and Rebecca was playing piano while Michael sang in his surprisingly good tenor voice. This was the life Eleanor had built from one desperate gamble, one moment of courage when she'd loaded her wagon with preserves and driven to a strange town hoping for salvation. She'd found so much more than that. She'd found love, family, purpose, and joy beyond measure. And it had all started because a lonely cowboy had looked at a desperate widow and seen someone worth helping, someone worth knowing, someone worth loving. He'd purchased her preserves, and in doing so, opened the door to something neither of them could have predicted but both of them desperately needed. That night, as Eleanor and Ryder prepared for bed, she looked at him and thought about the younger version of herself who'd arrived in Alpine all those years ago. That Eleanor had been so scared, so uncertain, so alone. She wished she could tell that younger self that everything would work out, that the best years of her life were still ahead, that love would find her in the most unexpected way. "What are you thinking about?" Ryder asked, catching her reflective expression. "Just how lucky we are. How grateful I am that you walked into that general store when you did." "Timing is everything," Ryder agreed. "A few minutes earlier or later and we might never have met. But we did meet, and you bought all my preserves. Best investment I ever made." Eleanor laughed and kissed him. "You've said that before. and I'll keep saying it. It's true." They settled into bed, Ryder's arm around Eleanor, her head on his shoulder, the same way they'd slept for 20 years. Outside, the Texas night was warm and still. Inside, surrounded by the family they'd created and the life they'd built, Eleanor and Ryder Yates drifted off to sleep, content and complete. The story that had started with preserves and loneliness had become one of love and legacy, of healing and hope, of two people who'd found each other exactly when they needed to most. And in a small town called Alpine, in the Davis Mountains of West Texas, that story continued, passed down through generations. A reminder that sometimes the most unexpected moments can change everything, and that kindness given to a stranger can transform two lives forever.